I thought it would be very interesting, and really, to talk about the stages of Mashiach. How can we recognize and understand the process itself? So I thought that would be very interesting to talk about. But before I begin, let me just say this year should be a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Reuven and Yeshaya ben Yisrael, Benjamin Wolf ben Tzvi Hirsch, and Baruch ben Benjamin Wolf. Anyway, I thought that it would be very interesting to understand the stages that the Messianic process is really all about. You see. So that would be very instructive. And then to try to compare it to now, 2022. I think that would be in many ways enlightening for people. You see. Now, the stages that Mashiach, I should say the Messianic process is all about, is in general, this is not specific, but in general, the Golus ends, the exile ends, which means the ability of Goyim, non-Jews, or the ability of the Erev Rav, Jews who want to take us away from Torah and from the covenant, the agreement with God, they end, that ends. You see, their ability to dominate the Jewish people and therefore Jewish history ends. That's the end of the Golus, which is an astounding concept, you see. Then what happens is there's a change in consciousness. And God does not want the Amoratzim. Jews should be ignoramuses in a Messianic era, you see. Because you don't do that, because what the Mashiach will introduce the Jewish people to is so sophisticated, so lofty, right, that if millions and millions of Jews don't know anything, how can they possibly understand what Mashiach is going to say? You see. To use a secular example, it's like taking Albert Einstein and using him as a kindergarten teacher. We can laugh at that, right? How in the world can you use that person who's considered one of the greatest geniuses of mankind, right? How in the world could he be a kindergarten teacher? It's really very funny. But in any case, so obviously, how can the Mashiach teach Torah? Because they don't know anything. They don't even know basic ideas, you see, of Torah. Like in that article, it said that, I mentioned the article in Houston, Texas, that there are 70,000 Jews in Texas. Houston, Texas, I should say. That's the amount of people there, 70,000 Jews. Yet there's less than 600 families in the whole Houston, Texas. And it said in the article that most Jews don't know anything. Nothing. So could you imagine a Mashiach coming to these people? And it's not just Houston, Texas. It's all over the United States. And it's certainly true of South America and Africa, right? And Asia and Europe and so on. So how can you take a person that is so unbelievably lofty, because he's the Mashiach, right, to teach people who know nothing about Judaism? So obviously there has to be a tremendous period of time when the Jews will be trained to know their Torah. That is a very important idea. So that happens after the exile is over. And then, of course, once that happens, then they can come to Eretz Yisrael. You're going to have the Beis HaMikdash, and then the Mashiach will arrive, which is interesting, you see, because now they can, rather appropriately, accommodate themselves to this type of figure and the environment that he introduces, which is beyond belief. I once explained that that the Messianic era is something we cannot even begin to understand, because it's Moloretz Deo is Hashem, that the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God. And I once mentioned also that the Messianic, the Torah of the Mashiach, that the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu is nothing compared to the Torah of the Mashiach. That's the gulf that separates the Messianic Torah with the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is everything we have. It's Bavli, Rishalmi, all the, Medrash, everything. So how in the world can you take this type of person and introduce him or expose him to the Jewish people? Doesn't even make sense. So clearly what the Baruch Shem is going to do is he's going to bring a tremendous amount of Torah to the Jewish people. Now this is basically, and then you'll have after Mashiach ben Yosef, and the main job of Mashiach ben Yosef is to begin that time period. He's the one that will contend with the Tumah, the Goyim, all those enemies of God. He will contend with that and vanquish them, right? And then after that happens, then you'll have the entry of Mashiach ben David that really ushers in the Messianic era. Then once he does that, there's Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead, and the whole Messianic process now continues, and so on. Anyway, so this is the general stages of the Messianic approach. Now, what is important to know is something else. What brings the Mashiach? And basically, there's only three things. If all the Jews are righteous, that's a Zakai, right? They're all righteous. They all do the mitzvahs. They are a tremendously holy nation, right? They all observe the Torah, everything. So then the Mashiach will come. That makes sense. Secondly, even if the Jews sin tremendously, but they all do tshuva, they all repent, then he will also come, you see, because their repentance will have completed the tikkun. I mean, this is exactly what happened by Haman and Purim, where God says that all the Jews, he decreed, should be annihilated. And then, of course, Mordechai was aware, and Esther had everybody fast for 3 days, and that means all the Jews did tshuva, right, throughout the kingdom of Persia, which was basically the whole world, right? And then, of course, they were saved with Mordechai and so on, and because they did the tshuva. And I once mentioned that Ezra could have been Mashiach ben Yosef, and he brought back the Jews after this period of time. Why wasn't he? Because only I think 70,000 Jews came back with him, and most Jews remained in Babylon. So obviously that didn't work, you see. So that's the second way Mashiach comes. The third way is if the world, especially the Jews, reach the level of Memtes Shari Tumah, the 49 levels of Tumah, of defilement, if you want to call that sinning, ignorance or whatever. And, we certainly are in the Memtes Shari Tumah, right? So the Mashiach, which I once gave a whole shiur about, he actually comes because of the Memtes Shari Tumah. You see, especially if the sin of the Memtes Shari Tumah is something that will destroy civilization, or it will destroy the whole spiritual roots of the Jewish people. So that's a very important idea, you see. In any case, so these three kinds of events can bring the Mashiach. We are now in the Memtes Shari Tumah, which I've spoken about, so the Mashiach can certainly come as a result of that. We now qualify, you see. But when the Mashiach does come, you see, let's take a look at the first time it happened. And we can actually identify the different stages. Egypt, Mitzrayim, was the Geula, was the redemption, right? And therefore you can actually identify the different stages based on the redemption from Egypt, Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt. You see? So the first thing that the Baruch Shem does is he separates the Jews, the first thing he does in general is he has to separate the Jewish people from the nations of the world. Because as long as they are intermingled with the nations of the world, it's very difficult not to learn from them. So he's got to separate that. We see that many times in the Torah. The Rabbi says, you have to there's a mitzvah to kill the 7 nations in Canaan because they will influence you to sin. He says that, God says that in Dvarim. So he therefore certainly has to separate the Jewish people from the nations of the world. Then after he separates them, he has to remove them, right? He has to remove them from the nations of the world, right? Not just separate them. And then, but while he's doing that, he's going to bring tremendous amount of ruchnius. So after he removes them, then he's going to bring them to a place where they will absorb a tremendous amount of spirituality, of ruchnius. You see? And the truth is, this is exactly what happened in Egypt. Separation, removal, and bring them to a place of tremendous spirituality. This happened in Egypt. The first way, the first God separated the Jews from Egypt is by the makas, by the 10 plagues or whatever, right, or blows that happened in Egypt, right? So once those makas started happening in Egypt, then the Jews were no longer slaves. They were therefore now separate. They were no longer under the dominion or the jurisdiction of the Egyptian. But what is interesting is that each makkah, each plague sort of, is not just a punishment for the Egyptians. It was also a revelation, a tremendous spiritual insight or revelation to the Jewish people. Because the problem is, again, you can't bring the Jewish people to a redemption as ignoramuses. You see? Because the Mashiach is so lofty that they have to be able to, in some way, be appropriate as students or whatever. So each makkah itself was a tremendous revelation, some aspect of a divine revelation. That's Torah, right? Because they are learning who God is as they see the Egyptians experience a makkah. So they learn who God is. And that's Torah, you see. Then, of course, after he separated them, right, he removed them, right, and they left Egypt. And then they experienced basically the second greatest enlightenment time of Torah, and that's the Yam Suf, when the sea split, Kriyas Yam Suf. Like we all know, that a maidservant saw more of divine situation or structure, divine secrets, than Yecheskel Hanavi, who wrote the divine chariot, Ma'aseh Merkava. So could you imagine what she saw? You see? So they were removed from Egypt, and at the same time, they were experiencing tremendous revelations of spirituality. And then, of course, the third one is that they came to Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, and they experienced Mount Torah, which, of course, is the ultimate ruchnius, you see. And Moshe Rabbeinu should have been then Mashiach ben Yosef, because he was the person that redeemed them. But because of the sin of the golden calf, you see, he was not the Mashiach ben Yosef. But Egypt provides us a model of the stages of redemption. Because if you think about it, we are in the same mess as they were, you see. We are in the Memtes Shari Tumah, You see. And actually, if you really think about it, you can actually see, based on certain psukim in the Torah, that this is the way it's going to happen. Right. Yeah, like I said, there are three ways. They could either be all righteous, or Balei Tshuva, or they can actually be in the Memtesh Shari Tumah, the 49 levels of evil or defilement. But you can actually see that. Let's see. The first place is a pasuk that I quote many times in Nitzavim, that it says that even if you're outcast, be at the ends of heaven. So God says, from there I will gather you. So obviously the question is, what do you mean from there? From there means from the ends of heaven. I will gather you, right? But why? What are the Jews doing at the ends of heaven? And the answer is, that's Memtesh Shari Tumah. That's what it means to be at the end of heaven. You see? And God says, Misham, from there I will gather you. That shows you that the way it's going to line up historically, right, is Mashiach is going to come because of the Memtesh Shari Tumah. See? That's a proof that that's exactly what's going to happen. Because that's where God is going to redeem us from the ends of heaven, which is the Memtesh Shari Tumah. So that's one proof. A second proof, we could say, is there's a pasuk that says, Lo yishokach Torah mizaroi, that the Torah will never be forgotten from the Jewish people. What does that mean? Well, God is saying that Torah will never be forgotten. What does that mean? It means that the Jews will be in the Memtesh Shari Tumah. Why? Because why do you have to tell the Jews that it will never be forgotten? Obviously, it refers to a time that the Jews are in such a low level, which is the 49 levels of defilement, right, that God has to say, don't worry, they won't forget it. Why do you have to say it? Because that's exactly what the situation is going to be. They're going to be in the 49 level of defilement, but God is promising them that they will never forget the Torah. There will be at least one Jew that remembers the Torah. You see, like I say, why would you need that statement? Because God is telling them exactly what's going to happen at the end. Very interesting, you see. And then there's another proof, right, that this is the way it's going to be. The Jews will wind up in the Memtes, right, because it says in the Torah, right, and the earth was unformed and void, for choshech and darkness, apnei sahoim was on the face of the deep. And then it says that darkness wasn't on the face of the deep. And then it says, for ruach elokim, and the Spirit of God, mirachefes, hovers, apnei hamoyim, on the face, right, on the waters, face of the waters, right? So there's a Balaturim that says that the numerical value, the gematria of V'ruach Elokim Rachefes, and the Spirit of God, right, hovers in the midst of the darkness. So he says that that's gematria, Zuhi Ruchoi Shel Melech HaMoshiach. This is the spirit, right, of the King Messiah. And therefore, what does it say? That this Mashiach hovers in the middle of the darkness, right? And then God says, Yehiyo. And Vayomer Elokim Yehiyo, and God said, let there be light. That means the Mashiach will hover in the middle of darkness, right? And what that's supposed to mean in the middle of darkness, right, is the Memtesh Shari Tumah. That is the 49th level of Tumah, of defilement. You see? So there you have it. You actually have three different verses that actually indicate that the Mashiach is going to come. How? Because the Jewish people and actually the entire world will be in the Memtesh Shari Tumah. That's how low it will sink, you see. And therefore the Torah is telling us this is exactly what will happen, you see. Then the Torah says, after it says, and if you're outcast, even if you're outcast, be at the ends of heaven, right? From there, I will take you, right? That means God is actually going to enter the Memtes Shaituma. He's actually going to enter what's called the Klippa, the domain of the Satan and the domain of all his, what's called Malchei Chavola, angels of destruction. Why does God have to enter? Because the problem is that if there is no Torah in Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people will not exist. Because the way the Jews exist is they are fed from the Shekhinah. In other words, the Shekhinah issues a tremendous what's called Shefa, divine flow to them. And the flow comes through Torah. That's how it comes. You see? So as we will see, if the Jews are in the Klippa, they're not learning Torah. You see, as we will see. Well, if that's the case, how do they survive? And therefore, God says, I will go into the Klippa directly and let them survive from the Shekhinah itself that is in the Klippa, that is in the domain of the Satan. That's an incredible concept, you see, that God himself, so to speak, the divine presence, enters the Klippa, right, so that he can provide this divine energy that is necessary to exist to the Jewish people. Because since they are in the darkness, that's the Memtes, they won't be able to survive. Imagine that, that we, because of our sinning, have forced or compelled, so to speak, God, in order to save us, to come into the Klippa, to energize us and allow us to exist. You see? That's why God says, and from there, right, I will gather you. Because why from there? Not that God comes into the Klippa, he already is in the Klippa. You see? That's where he's been for thousands of years. You see, in the Klippa itself, in order to save the Jews, once the Jews began to go in Golus. So in order to save them, he himself had to enter the Klippa. And therefore, from there, he will rescue, redeem, separate the Jews from the Goyim. But then it says, Umisham, and from there, after he gathers them, Yikochecho, he will take you. You see, that's a very interesting concept. What does it mean God will take you? What does that mean? It means that every Jew is going to become a massive Talmid Chacham. Because that's what it is. When you learn Torah, it's as if God takes you. Because the greatest path to be with God, the greatest path to hug God, to be dovek in God, is to learn his Torah. Because it is through the Torah that the Shefa, that the divine energy flows. You see. So when it says, Umisham yikochecho, and from there he will take you, what that means is he's going to make everybody an incredible Talmid Chacham. Isn't that amazing? But that's exactly what he did in Egypt, right? Except they didn't become a Talmid Chacham through Torah because there wasn't a Torah then. The Torah was the Gilui of the Makkas and the Kriyas Yamsuf. That was the Torah in their day. So they experienced an unbelievable revelation because that was the Torah that they were experiencing. You see. And then it says, V'hevi'acho, after it says, and from there he will take you. And then it says, V'hevi'acho, and he will bring you to Eretz Yisrael. There you are. And Eretz Yisrael is where they will finally come, leave all the Goyim. That's the end of the exile. Imagine, all the Jews will leave America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, you name it. They will leave those countries, you see, and they will all come to Eretz Yisrael. Why? And the reason for that, because in Eretz Yisrael, there will be a Beis HaMikdash. That will be the third Beis HaMikdash. And, you won't even have to convince Jews to leave America or whatever, because the amount of divine energy coming out of the Beis HaMikdash right, will be just beyond belief. Because I once mentioned in a Shiur, because that Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, that third Beis Hamikdash, is really the Beis Hamikdash Lamaila in heaven, called Olam Yetzirah, that becomes physical and descends to earth. You see, so what that does is it will intoxicate everybody. You won't be. Imagine if there was a drug that could give you a high, right? A high that just indescribable, right? Without addiction, without any harm to your body. I guarantee you half the planet, or maybe the whole planet, will line up to take it. Because who didn't want to experience an unbelievable joy? Well, that's exactly what's going to happen when the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, the third Beis Hamikdash, is in Eretz Yisrael. And of course, all the Jews will then go to Eretz Yisrael, not by compulsion. In fact, they're going to run to Eretz Yisrael to receive that unbelievable, right, experience of divine Shekhinah. That's the divine energies and so on, you see? And of course, all of this will be orchestrated basically by the Mashiach ben Yosef, you see. And he himself has to grow in learning, because I mentioned that he accepted on himself, in order for every Jew to get Olam Haba, tremendous amount of suffering. And I mentioned also previously that the suffering of Mashiach ben Yosef, right, is tremendous amaratzus. Sounds strange, but tremendous inability to be able to learn Torah. You see, so not that he doesn't know Torah, but it's an unbelievable struggle for him to learn Torah. This is Mashiach ben Yosef. And from this we can now understand something very interesting. The question is, well, how are the Jews going to learn the Torah? They don't know anything, right? So how are they going to learn the Torah? Because what God wants them not only to learn Torah, right, but to do the Torah, right? He wants them to have the merit of actually doing the mitzvahs. How's that going to happen? Well, there's a very strange medrash. And from that medrash, it's a medrash Rabbi, we can actually understand how it can happen. And that is, it says in the medrash Rabbi, it's in Parshas Sav, third section, it says the following, that, Ein hagaluyos miskansos, the exiles will only be gathered, which means that it will end, Elo b'schus, only in the merit, limud Mishnais. That's what it says. When the Jews, they will learn Mishnais, that will remove the exile. So the question is, what does that mean? Because what Mishnais really is, it is the totality of Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's what it is. And what the Medrash is telling us is that that God wants the Jews to know the totality of Torah Sheba'al Peh, all of it, right? And Mishnais is that sefer that has the totality of the entire oral law, you see, which is basically the whole Torah. And what that Medrash says is the following, that if you learn Mishnais, all of it, Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 orders of the Mishnah, right, then not only will you really know the whole, especially if you learn it Be'iyun, right, means in depth, not just superficially, but if you go, and there are ways of doing this, how do you learn a Mishnah Be'iyun? But if you do, you see, if you learn the Mishnais Be'iyun, then you will know the entire Torah, you see, which is amazing when you think about that. But from that Medrash, and this the Medrash says, it says, Zois Teres HaChatos, this is the law of the Korban Chatos, the offering of the Chatos. So the Gemara learns out, right? Why does it say Zois Teres Chatos? It should just say Zois HaChatos, this is the Chatos, the sin offering. So what the Gemara says is, it says Zois Teres HaChatos, that if you learn the laws of offerings, korbanos, chatos, then it is as if you have brought a korban chatos. That's what it says. Now that's an astounding concept. So we see, therefore, that if you learn Torah, if you learn Mishnais, which is all of the oral law, not only will you have the mitzvah of limud Torah, learning Torah, but you will also have the mitzvah of doing the entire Torah. Because just like a chatos, if you learn about the chatos, it's as if you brought chatos. The Medrash says, if you do learning Mishnais, since you're learning the entire Torah, because that's where it is, right? Mishnais, then it's as if you have done the entire Torah. It's as if you have observed the entire Torah. Yeah, but that's an incredible concept. So it comes out that learning Mishnais, right, the entire 6 orders of the Mishnah, you actually not only learn the entire Torah, and if you learn it be'iyun, you will know hundreds of thousands of halachas from the Mishnais, and it will be as if you have performed the actual mitzvah itself. That's what that medrash means, that the exiles will only be end when? By the merit of learning Mishnais. But why? And we now know why. That when you learn Mishnais, not only do you get the mitzvah of limud Torah, learning Torah, but you get the mitzvah of asiyas Torah, performing the Torah. And therefore, that will be, in the end, the way God will teach the Jewish people their Torah. Then you see that from the actual Medrash Rabbah. It's an astounding Medrash Rabbah that reveals a profound secret. You see, in fact, if you learn 4 Mishnahs a day, you would finish 4,192 Mishnayos in 3 years. Could you imagine? And if you learn it a certain way, how to remember it, you would know the entire oral law, right? In 3 years. Could you imagine? And there are ways to learn it in 1 year, right? If you learn 12 Mishnayos a day, right, you finish all of it in 1 year. Could you imagine all the Jews motivated to do that? So they will not only have learned Mishnayos, they will not only have learned the oral law, right, in 1 year, if they do 12 Mishnayos a day, but they will actually have performed every single mitzvah of the Torah, because learning and doing comes from learning. And now you understand why it says Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, right? That the learning Talmud Torah, learning Torah, weighs as much, is as significant, right, as all the mitzvahs combined. Why? Because if you do a mitzvah, you get reward for the mitzvah. But if you learn the Mishnais of the mitzvah, which is Talmud Torah, you not only learned the mitzvah, but you did the mitzvah. So obviously, it's worth more in a certain sense than the entire, all the mitzvahs of the Torah, performing it. That's what you see. And that's what it means, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. That learning the Torah weighs more than all the other mitzvahs, you see, because learning that Mishnais is not only learning Mishnais, but is doing all the mitzvah. And that's what God wants. He wants the Jews to have, that's how you can take a poor person who's an Am Haaretz and make him into an incredible Talmid Chacham, if you know how to teach the Mishnais correctly. And there's an entire way of doing that. But in any case, that's very interesting, because this is a Medrash Rabbah, and that's what it is. I'm really trying to explain it, you see. Now the problem is that Torah today, right, is in the Klippa, because they did the Chet Egel, you see. When they received the Torah, right, Moshe Rabbeinu was coming down with the 10 Commandments, and all of a sudden he saw that they were worshiping a golden calf. So he hurled the luchos, the tablets, at the bottom of the mountain, and he broke it all. Now what that means is that the Torah itself is now in the Klippa. What does that mean? That means the Torah itself has now entered the domain of the Satan, and therefore, because of what the Jews did. So the Satan has dominion over your ability to learn. That's what it means. They can block the satanic block of your learning Torah happens. And the way to get that Torah out of the klipa is Mesiras Nefesh, tremendous yagiyah, tremendous amount of labor. And then what it does is it breaks the klipa's ability to hold on to the Torah itself. You see, and like the Chidor says in Bnei David, whatever, that the job of the Jew is not even to learn the Torah; it's to break the hold of the satanic, of the Satan on the Torah. And when you break that through yagiyah, through tremendous amount of labor and struggle, automatically you release. You see, you release the Satan's hold on the Torah, and it flies into your mind. There's a great deal to talk about that, but that's what happened because of the sin of the golden calf. That Torah went into the klipa means it's now dominated by a evil force. You see, in order to take it out of that evil force, you need to tremendously struggle and learn in order to do that. And then it's released, and it flies into your mind. I mean, there's a great deal to talk about that. And that is why, you see, it's so difficult to learn, because you got to pull it out of the Satan. He's blocking it. He's blocking your ability to learn. And the Ari says one of the manifestations of the fact that the Torah is in the klipa means he's in the domain of the Satan is when you have a question. Because the original Torah, there were no questions. It was clear. It was incredible. But because there's a blockage, automatically you actually have questions. You don't understand something, you see? And that is one of the reasons why learning Torah is so difficult. It takes so much incredible struggle, energy, right? And patience to learn it. Because what you're really doing is you're trying to break it out of the hands of the domain of the Satan, you see. And by the way, that's also why the Torah looks the way it does. It's when you look at the Mishnais, the Gemara, you begin to see it's disorganized. You know, it's very disorganized. That it's very advanced. It's in pieces. And the reason for that is one of the manifestations of the klipa. You see, that the way we learn it is in many ways very difficult because it's disorganized and it's in pieces. Besides the fact that it's advanced, many times Masechta Mishnais will have what should have come later first and what should have come first later. It's disorganized, you see. And that's the work of the klipa. And therefore it's much more difficult to understand the Torah. But all of that has to come out of the klipa. What's going to bring it out of the klipa? And for that we have a very interesting phenomenon. That is the phenomenon of Daf Yomi. Why is there a Daf Yomi? I once spoke about this. You know, what do you mean learn a blot a day? You know, how can you know the Torah by learning a blot a day? You see. And the idea to that is that at the end of time there will be tremendous darkness, as I said, which is the Mem Teshai Tumah. As I said, and the darkness on the face of the deep. The problem is if there's darkness, right, that means the Jews will be Amaratzim. They'll be ignoramuses, because that's what the darkness is made of, right? Ignorance of the Jewish people, right? So if that's the case, they're not learning Torah. If they're not learning Torah, then who's going to take out the Torah from the klipa? So therefore the Rebbeinu Shalom put in the mind, right, of Rabbi Shapiro, right, to create what's called the Daf Yomi structure, where you learn a blot a day. So therefore the Mesiras Nefesh, right, is to get up at 5 a.m. or to learn a blot every single day for 7.5 years. So it's the Mesiras Nefesh, the sacrificing your comforts. That itself is the yagiyah. That's the labor that takes the entire Torah out of the klipa, you see. So Daf Yomi is a way that when the Jews find themselves in the Memtesh Tumah, they can actually take the Torah, continue to take the Torah out of the Klippa. Why? Because the struggle to learn a blot a day is enormous. And there are hundreds of thousands of Jews that are doing Daf Yomi, you see, whether they understand it or they don't, but they have to struggle to keep up with it, you see, and continue to learn. So the way the Torah comes out of the Klippa now, right, is not so much learning it in a certain depth. You know, the Yagiyah comes from the sacrifice, the difficulty of attending a Daf Yomi Shiur. You see, even if you don't really know what's going on, but just the effort that's involved in attending a Shiur, well, you have to give up. You imagine 7.5 years you have to learn a blot a day, right? That takes it out of the Klippa. So it's amazing that the Rosham arranged a spiritual event that can actually, in a certain sense, solve the problem of taking the Torah out of the Klippa, you see, by the struggle to learn a daf every day, all 2,711 pages. Anyway, it's very interesting about how, but this is what the Rosham is going to do. He has to educate the Jewish people, right? This is part of the redemption. He's not going to bring the Jewish people that are complete ignoramuses, right, to a Mashiach. He has to educate them. And I've given or outlined certain ways that this is really very possible to do. In any case, this is the idea of the whole concept of the stages of the Mashiach, how he will come, what are the stages, and the prediction that the Torah actually tells us that there will be Memtesh Tumah. All of this is found in the Torah. So let's hope that this year, right, certainly the process of Mashiach will begin, and therefore the dominion of evil over the Jewish people will cease, and it will turn around where there will only be not evil, but there will only be toiv, and that obviously will usher in the entire Messianic era. Any questions?
Yes. So, Hashem has to educate the Jewish people.
Right.
Mashiach.
Yes.
Now, the education, it doesn't have to be like a deep concept. It can even be the surface. The main thing is that struggling to and sacrificing our time to hear it. Is that basically how we're going to be redeemed because of the sacrifice of it?
No, they'll actually know the Torah.
Oh, we will actually learn the Torah.
Yes. Yeah, because if you learn, as I showed you from the Medrash Rabbi, if you learn Mishnais, then you can actually learn the entire Torah. People do not realize how much there is in the Mishnais. There's 4,192 Mishnahs. It's a lot of Mishnais. If you think about it, each Mishnah has approximately 8 halachas, right? So if you multiply 8 times 4,192, that's over 33,000 halachas. Do you know how much that is? 33,000 halachas. But the interesting thing about the Mishnais is the Mishnais is not a textbook. What Rabbi wrote is not a textbook. It's a record of the oral law. And therefore there's a tremendous amount missing. The introduction to the Mishnah, many ideas that the Mishnah does not bring down, which should have been brought down in a certain sense. Then there's ideas mefoshim on the Mishnah. So if you add up all the missing information, you see, basically there's over 100,000 Yediyos HaTorah Mishnais. That is a phenomenal amount of information. And if you learn that, especially if the Mishnais is organized in a certain way, and it can be. I once talked about Mishnaic maps. Then it is possible to become a massive Talmud Chacham in a very short order, because Mishnais is the entire platform of the oral law. That's what Rabbi did. You see, so if somebody really focuses on that, concentrates, he will know over 100,000 yediyos. Ask yourself, how many people know 100,000 facts, information, right, of the oral law? Very few. Very few know that type of, very few have that type of mastery or command of the oral law. So could you imagine what it means to learn Mishnais Be'iyun, to learn Mishnais in depth, which is not hard, because Mishnais is not like Gemara, in the sense that there's no shakavataya, there's no give and take discussion, there's no debate. It's straight facts. So if that is organized and taught, in a tremendously sequenced method, it would be incredible. And actually, like I said, if you taught everybody in 4 Mishnais a day, you would know the whole thing in 3 years. Could you imagine in 3 years knowing the entire totality of Torah? You see? And if you learn 6 Mishnais a day, you could finish in 2 years and 4 months. You see? And ultimately, if you learn 12 Mishnais a day, you'd finish the whole thing in 1 year. And it's possible, you should know, to finish all of it in 1 year. There are sfarim that allow you to do that. So therefore, it's a no-brainer. Imagine any kid in a high school has a seder, not the whole day, right? Because he can learn Gemara part of the day. But if he had one seder, right, the time period, where he learns Mishnais, let's say 4 Mishnais a day, imagine a 13-year-old kid by the time he's 16 or 17 will be an incredible Talmud Chacham. And if he commits it to memory, which is not hard, by the way, and there are ways to memorize all of it, all 4,192 Mishnais, could you imagine what this kid would be? Beyond belief. And he's only 16 years old. You see, that will eventually, it has to happen, because that's the only way to educate somebody in a rapid way. It's called rapid education. There is no other way. So the question is, God going to do this through natural means or supernaturally? And I believe that it's going to be through natural means. Because when the Mashiach comes because of Memtesh Shari Tumah, right, then he will come naturally. Because then Jewish people do not deserve him to come supernaturally. So he will become naturally. So the question is there a natural way to teach, educate the Jews, in a very short way, with a tremendous amount of depth and a comprehensive command of the entire oral law? And the answer is yes. Mishnais. And in the Mishnah, you include many ideas that are not in the Mishnah, but are part of the Mishnah. You can include Rishonim, Achronim, and so on. There's no end to how much you can include. But in the end, it means that you can know the entire oral law with incredible mastery just by learning Mishnais. You see? And today's time, there are many ways to do that. For instance, Art Scroll has 3 Mishnais, 3 different types. And they bring down all the missing information. You see that the Mishnah leaves out. So if you learn Mishnais with Art Scroll, or whatever, or Kahati, or a tremendous Mishnais called Siyata Dishmaya, you will become an unbelievable Talmud Chacham. You will know more than 90% of all Jews, right? Just by that, you see. So there are educational alternatives to what is going on today, right? Now, it doesn't mean you learn Mishnais all day. No. You could learn Gemara in the morning and the afternoon, but there has to be a time period that people will wake up and realize that you could become an unbelievable Talmid Chacham by learning facts, halachas, and not learning Shulchan Aruch, because a lot of it is minhagim. You want to learn the oral law, you see. So Mishnais is an incredible way to do it. You see, I remember...
Where does this whole process of learning fall into the process of Mashiach? Is that after Mashiach ben Yosef is revealed? Is it after Gog and Magog, the war? Is it before Mashiach ben David? Like, when are we going to have this revelation of knowledge across the board, across all the Jewish nation?
I believe it can... there are many obstacles to overcome, but I believe that if people wake up and realize that what God wants is to have a mastery of the Torah, as it says, Ashrei mi shebo lekam v'tamud b'yodoi. Happy is the man who comes with the entire Talmud, the entire learning is in his hand. That's called mastery, you see. And if people realize this is the way to do it, and that there's a way, people think, well, maybe the only way to master the oral law is to learn through the entire Shas. No, not really. I mean, it's one way, but another way, and you see that from the Mishnah where it says, 5 years old, Mishnai and Pirkei Avos, that by 5 years old you should learn Tanakh, by 10 years old you should learn Mishnais, and by 15 you should learn Gemara. So the Mishnah itself tells you that you need to learn Mishnais first, because that is the knowledge itself. That's the database that you have to have before you learn Gemara. You see? So even if you want to learn it simultaneous with Gemara, but how could you not learn a database? This is what's called the basis of the entire Torah, is Mishnais. You see, but people ignore that, and people, therefore, many people never really succeed in learning and mastering the oral law. But I believe, but from the Medrash, you see, they expose the secret of what this means from that Medrash Rabbah that I communicated, where it says the exiles will only end. I mean, you realize what that statement is? The Golus will end. Ein ha-galuyos miskantzos. That the exiles can only end because of the schus, the merit, right, of limud Mishnais. You realize what that statement means? The question is why? Like I said, because God must educate the Jewish people. You cannot enter a Messianic era as an ignoramus. Because how could you take advantage of the enormous advanced level of what's going on in the Messianic era? So the question is how? So that Medrash points exactly how. I mean, it's a Medrash. It's not me. And it says, Mishnais. You see? And I'm merely explaining what the Medrash means and why. Because Mishnais is a complete record of the oral law. And today we have Sfarim that bring down all the missing information. So it's unbelievable. I believe if you took even a 10-year-old kid and you taught him the entire Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, I believe that he would be unbelievable. You could compare him to almost anybody, and he would easily knock everybody out, you see. It's just an incredible idea that, for whatever reason, has not caught on. People don't realize that you need an introduction. You need a basic, preparation to learn Gemara. You need data, halacha, but not the halacha of Shulchan Aruch, the halacha of the Mishnais, because that is the totality of the oral law. It's funny. I'll tell you one incident which is very interesting. Okay, there was a very big gadol b'Yisrael, Rabbi Yisrael Zev Gusman. A lot of people have heard of him. He's nifta, I think, in 1990 or whatever. But he was an incredibly great person. He was on the Bezdin, on the court of Rab Chaim Oizer Grudzensky, who was the Gadol Hador. and he was on that bezdin, to sit and adjudicate cases. Do you know how old he was? He was 21 years old, sitting on a bezdin with the Gadol Hador. Now you're going to ask me, that's incredible. How does a man achieve such greatness or such command of Torah? And the answer is because and I read a biography of him. When he was a little kid, he went to a cheder, and the menahel of that cheder did not allow any kid to learn Gemara unless he finished all Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Yeah, that's exactly what happened in Europe, right? So you couldn't learn Gemara unless you knew the entire Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. That's 4,192 Mishnais. So they write in the biography that Rav Guzman therefore learned Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, all of it, and he knew it by heart. Could you imagine, right? A 10-year-old kid knowing the entire Mishnais by heart? Yeah, that's how he was able to finish Shas at 16, right? Because Mishnais, by the way, is 40% of Shas. People don't realize that. And that's why he was able to sit on the bezdin of Rab Chaim Oizer at 21. Could you imagine if you had I believe you can do that to every kid. Get them to memorize all Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Could you imagine what they'll know? I'm not saying they're going to sit on the bezdin, obviously. But could you imagine the unbelievable advancement of Klal Yisrael if they knew the entire oral law by heart? It would be unbelievable. Yet nobody seems to understand. And like I said, Mishnais is 40% of Shas. Right, that's how much room it takes. You see? So if there was one Seder, let's say a 2-hour Seder, where each kid would learn, 4 Mishnais a day or 6 Mishnais a day, and they could do that in a Shiur, and they had to commit it to memory, which is not that hard, imagine what they would know. Imagine what that would do to the Jewish people. And then if a Baal Tshuva wants to come back and be a Baal Tshuva, right, he would be able to learn the entire oral law in 2 years, whatever. Could you believe that? Instead of taking 35 years, he would do it in 2. You see, people don't realize what that means. You see, and I want to tell you something. Here's the mistake that is made in the Kiruv movement. Here it comes. In order to make somebody a Baal Tshuva, there are 2 things you have to do. One is to turn them on, to become committed to be Jewish, to learn, to do mitzvahs, but especially to learn. And the second thing is to make him into a massive Talmid Chacham, because then he'll remain with the Jewish religion. You need the Torah. Without that, they slip and fall back. But how? I mean, a guy goes to Yeshiva, it takes 35 years to figure out what's going on until he finishes the whole Shas. But what a mistake. He could learn Mishnais Be'iyun, right? He could finish it in 2 years. And in those 2 years, he would know 4,192 Mishnahs. He would know 40% of Shas. And he would know over 100,000 Yediyos, facts, knowledge of the Torah itself. Right? And he can even do it in 1 year. It's possible. Right? And then he would have the Torah. That's what the Baal Tshuva movement has to do. The only way to make a guy stay is if you teach him Torah. But it can't be Torah that takes decades. They got to know it now. They don't have the time or the patience, whatever. You see? So actually, Mishnais is the solution to how you make Baalei Tshuva committed and remain. You see? So it would save all the Baal Tshuvas. Could you imagine if a Baal Tshuva can now know the Torah in a year or 2 years or maximum 3 years? And he learned to be Iyun, which means in tremendous depth, right? Could you imagine what that would do? Not only that, what about all those adults that learned in Yeshiva and they don't hardly know anything? It would save them because they now could learn Mishnais Be'iyun in depth, and they would be able to master the entire oral law in 2 years, 3 years? It would save them. Then imagine, right, what it would do to the high schools. And what about the Daf Yomi guys? Right? What is Daf Yomi? But how can a guy remember anything with Daf Yomi? But what happens if a guy learned the Mishnais of that Masechta that he's going to learn in Daf Yomi, and he knew it by heart? That would change the entire fabric of that Masechta, because he would have all the knowledge. You see, it would be absolutely incredible. It would take Daf Yomi and make it from a learning experience to a knowing experience. And I believe it will also save all the at-risk kids. Why? Because the reason why most people rebel, right, is because they fail. You can't believe the amount of kids that fail, really, in the yeshiva. I believe that 70% of any given class never make it. And eventually they leave. Because Gemara is an advanced limud. Gemara is advanced. It presupposes that you have a tremendous, massive grasp of the database of Shas, you see? And only Mishnais can give that to you, if it's taught the right way. Could you imagine? Take an at-risk kid and you teach him Mishnais, but there's ways of doing it that will tremendously spur him on and increase his interest. There are different ways of teaching it. But in any case, could you imagine? He would recommit to learn Torah and to be, a Torah observant. Look at what it would do. It would save the Baalei Tshuva. It would be the adult education. It would do massive amounts of improvement to Daf Yomi. Save the at-risk kids. And if it was introduced in every high school, a 2-hour Seder in Mishnais Be'iyun, it would make every kid in every high school, maybe in the 7th or 8th grade, a massive Talmud Chochem, because it could be designed as an incredible textbook that's based on the Mishnais. Wouldn't that be incredible? And it would end the Golus. There you are. I make my case.
So how do we turn the ignoramus to learn in a natural way? I mean, in my opinion, the only way to do that is through a supernatural way.
That's
for years,
what you're saying is true. But I believe there's a concept called pyramid. Let me explain that to you. We make a mistake. There are hundreds of thousands of Jews. Forget the millions. Just let's deal with the people now. There are hundreds of thousands of Jews that are dying to be Talmidei Chachomim. They're dying. They want to know the Torah. And there are hundreds of thousands. Think of Lubavitch. Lubavitch has 5,000 shlichim, right? And what they do is have a Judaic center. They have who knows how many hundreds of thousands of balabatim who don't know anything. What happens if there was an educational process that could make every balabas a master of the oral law? And that's Lubavitch. What about, Lev Li'achim in Eretz Yisrael? What about Arachim, right? There are so many Baalei Tshuva movements. They don't know what to do with the guys, basically, so they do the standard. They teach them Gemara. Of course that's not going to work, really, because it'll take years for them, and most people don't have the time. You see, but they're not the only ones. There are hundreds of thousands of adults that are basic amoratzim. They failed. They don't remember anything, even though they've been in yeshiva for 20 years. You see, they don't remember anything. And I've spoken to who knows how many. They don't remember what they learned in yeshiva. How could they? Because it's very difficult to learn Gemara, you see, because Gemara is Shakavataya. 90% of the Gemara is give and take, is debate, and nobody remembers the Shakavataya unless you review it 50 times. Nobody chazes it, reviews it 50 times. You see? So there are hundreds. Just walk over to any guy who went to yeshiva and ask him, what do you remember from what you learned? It's astounding. But what happens if they memorize a certain basis, a platform, Mishnais, and they knew that by heart? Do you know how easy it is to recall anything when you know the entire Mishnais by heart? You see? Then you have the entire cabinet, file cabinet. You know exactly every halacha is because you know all 4,192 Mishnais. You see? This is really, in the end, what has to happen. And the beauty of this is the Medrash Rabbah, where it says it's going to end the gullus. I'm just explaining that because God wants Jews to master the oral law. And the way to do it is to learn Mishnais. You see? There are many Gemaras that talk about this. You see? But it's really astounding what knowing all Mishnais can do for a person. If he learns it the right way, in depth, right, and he commits it to memory, which is not hard. It is not hard to memorize Mishnais. It's a mistake that people make. In any case, yeah, this is the way to do it. Now, how do you convince people? I don't know. But someday they will be convinced. You see. Because I believe that this is the way to do it, through natural means called the limit of Mishnais. And that will end the exile. So what I'm saying is there are hundreds of thousands of Jews now that want to learn Torah. They want to master the Torah. And they can't. You see. Because everybody thinks the only way to master the Torah is Gemara. Of course, it's true. But that's not the only way. You see. A different way, in fact, much more basic, is to master the Mishnais, like the story of Rabbi Yisrael Zev Gustman. Yeah. And the Gemara itself says that first you learn, Ben Chomish Lemikro, 5 years old to learn Tanakh, Esser Shonim Lemishnot, 10 years old to learn Mishnah, and to learn Gemara at 15, you see. I mean, you have to ask yourself, what's the rush? Why do you have to subject 11, 12, 10-year-old kid, right, to learn Gemara? Why not teach him the entire Shisha Sidvei Mishnah? You see, that's, to my mind, all of this is tragic. Because everybody's learning advanced material without knowing the basics. And the basics is Mishnais. And like I say, today you have that. So start off with these people. Educate 300,000 Jews. Make them masters of the oral law. I guarantee you that all the Baalei Tshuva will now introduce this method to the people that they make religious, right? So it'll pyramid, you see, because people will be astonished at the speed of mastery. They will be astonished. So it'll pyramid. First you'll have, let's say 100 people. They will tell their friends. It'll be 1,000 people. They will tell their friends that there's a way to do this that's validated by the Chazal. You see, it's interesting. In Sanhedrin, right, there's a Masechta Sanhedrin on page 42, where it says there, Rabbi Yochanan says, with whom can you find a Jew that can wage war with Torah? With somebody who can learn Torah and actually understand it, with somebody who has bundles of Mishnais. It says that. It's a Gemara. And Rashi comments on that, right? He says this. He said, even if you have a great head, there's no comparison if you know the Mishnah, because then you have all the idiyos. You have all the knowledge, all the basic information. And that's the way, all the basic concepts. And therefore, that's the way to do it. This is Rabbi Yochanan. There are many Gemaras like that. But in any case, I believe this would be a tremendous, approach to solving the Amaratzis of Klal Yisrael. You see. Hopefully, it'll be able, I would always suggest it would be interesting to have a convention. There's no such thing in Judaism. You have medical conventions, legal conventions, and so on. But there's no such thing as a convention. Yeah, people will tell me there is, like Torah Masorah has a convention. But they have to examine, why is it that so many people, after being in a yeshiva for 20 years, hardly remember anything? Did they ever ask themselves that question? You see? No. Of course not. Did you ever wonder, how does a college make a guy an engineer in 5 years? You know how much information of physics and mathematics a guy in college has to have to become an engineer and certified? Yeah, how do they do it? And the answer is because they don't begin with an advanced book. They begin from the beginning. Engineering 101. You see? They don't begin with a journal article about engineering. And what people don't understand is Gemara is an advanced treatment of Torah. You can't begin that, especially a 10-year-old kid. It's insane. Why? Because they don't know anything. They need a database. They need a foundation. Kids don't have foundations, you see? And imagine if every adult would have the foundation of the entire oral law and they would know it by heart. Could you imagine what kind of revolution that would be? Yeah, they should have a convention and tell this to people. You people are making a tremendous mistake. That is why most kids, tragically, will not know anything or hardly anything. They won't remember anything. They'll know it when they learn it, maybe. But they're not going to remember anything because they're learning Gemara. They're learning Torah from an advanced sefer without a foundation. Nobody does that. But that's what they do all the time in Yeshiva. What can I tell you? It's tragic. Any other questions?
Since you know it so well, why don't you put out a memo to all the yeshivot to let them know?
Because nobody will buy it. Everybody's convinced this is the way. That's why.
Okay.
Logic will not work. Because everybody wants to learn Lumdus. Everybody wants to learn Gemara in depth. Nobody's interested in... Of course they are interested incidentally, but nobody realizes you need a basis. You need a foundation of a database before you really can know anything. If you don't do it that way, then you'll always know the Torah piecemeal. And you won't remember it because 90% of a Gemara is debate, Shakavataya. Nobody remembers that unless you review it 10, 20, 30 times, which nobody does. That's a tragic mistake that everybody makes. I once said, imagine there's an organization called Dirshu, right? And they pay you. They give you bechinas. So I once tried to convince one of the people in Dirshu, do it to Mishnais. You have to learn 6 Mishnais every day. And then you get tested, feedback. In 2.5 years, you will know the totality of the oral law. In 2.5 years instead of 7.5. And then you can learn the Gemara. Once you have the database of Mishnais, where you know the entire oral law in depth, you see, because then you get bechinas, you get tests and so on and so forth. That's the way to do it, you see? Or at least make a separate track of that. But it fell on deaf ears. What can I tell you? You see? That's what it is. There's really a great deal more to say about all of this, which obviously this is not the forum for that. So I've just expressed, in many ways, a tragedy. Because when people go to yeshiva for 20 years and hardly remember anything, what do you think they feel like? They feel terrible because they know they don't remember anything. Can you imagine going to school for 20 years and hardly remembering anything? Yeah, maybe when you learned it, you knew it. Yeah, but that's the main test. Look, the classic is if you ask God, what do I want? What do you want, right? You know what he answers? He says, I already told you. It says in Kriya Shema, V'shinantem levanecho, right? And you shall teach them, right, to your children diligently. So the Gemara in Kedushin says, what does it mean, teach them diligently? So the Gemara says, Sheyeh mechudotem beficho. What does that mean? That it should be sharp, right, in your mouth. And Rashi explains that. What do you mean sharp in your mouth? And Rashi says that if somebody comes over to you and asks you something, you should spit it out immediately. You know what that's called? That's called mastery. That's what God wants. He wants mastery. You see? So the quickest way and really the best way is master the Mishnais, because that is the entire oral law. And then you do Gemara. So imagine you do Mishnais first. You do 4 Mishnahs a day, let's say. Take it 3 years, right? Then you do, since you know the whole Mishnais, which is 40% of Shas, right? Then you do the Gemara, right? And when you do the Gemara, right? So you do 2 blot a day, right? So instead of 7.5 years, because you're now doing a 2 blot a day, because you know 40% of Shas, right? You'll finish in almost 4 years. So 4 plus 3 is 7. In 7 years, you will be an Odom Godel Ad Mi'oid. You will be one of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim of this generation, because you will know Mishnais by heart, 40% of Shas, and you have learned the whole 2 blot a day, right? Because you already know 40%. And you know every area. No area is strange to you. So imagine in 7 years, you could sit down and probably join the Bezdin of Rabbi Chaim Oizer. That's Guzma. But the main idea is it would be incredible. 7 years, you could master the totality of oral law plus the Gemara, because at least you did it right. You have a foundation first. By the way, I'm not the only one that says this. The Maharal is famous. He screams at people who don't learn Mishnais first. He said the whole thing is suicide, and he's right. That's why 70% of a guy who goes to Yeshiva basically will not remember hardly anything. What kind of statistic is that? Yet if it changed, and you don't have to change the whole day, so learn Gemara, 1 Seder, 2 Sedarim, but there should be at least time put away to learn facts, knowledge, the oral law, which is Torah Shebe'al Peh, right? And Mishnais is the way to do it, especially today, because there's many Mishnais written that bring down all the missing information that Rabbi left out, and they bring Rishonim and Achronim. I mean, tremendous what the art school has done. Shaita Dishmaya, there's certain incredible Mishnais. Yeah, that's what, and they would solve the problem, you see. And the bad news is we're losing guys because nobody remembers anything. Maybe they remember, just a couple of ideas, but they have not mastered anything, you see. So we're losing a whole generation of people that don't remember anything. So who's going to transmit the Torah? Do they realize this? Why is it all the Gedolim today are over 70 or 80 or 90? Why? I'm telling you something. If you learn Mishnais Be'iyun and you memorize it, you will be an Adam Gadol, guaranteed. Especially if the Mishnais is taught Be'iyun in the right way. Yes, people have no concept of what a Mishnais could do for a guy. Right. It would solve the problem. It would change the Jewish people. That's how pivotal it is. But anyway, I want to just connect this to the Medrash Rabbah that actually will end the Golus. Right? That's what it would do. Okay. Anything else? Is everybody out there?
Yep, we're all here.
Yes, I think you're just changing our consciousness, which you said had to happen.
Yeah,
the way
I'm showing you. Yeah, I'm showing you the way to do it. This is the solution, and the proof of that is the Medrash Rabbah. But you don't even need that. It's obvious. You do not learn advanced material without a foundation. When you want to build a building, you can't start with the 5th floor, right? You got to dig a foundation first. Everything needs a foundation. And as far as I'm concerned, that's why colleges succeed with people getting certificates. You see? I'm not saying, the colleges are not perfect, but they're able to make a professional. A lawyer in 3 years, an accountant in 2, an engineer in 5, a doctor in 7. How? How do they do it? You know how much information is out there in professions? They do it because they have foundations. You don't learn advanced material first. That's in graduate school, not an undergraduate. And the example I always like to give, imagine a guy wants to become an engineer, right? So he doesn't want to go to undergraduate. He doesn't have the time, doesn't have the money. So somehow he gets his way into a graduate engineering program. After 2 weeks in that program, the professor gives a quiz, right? And the professor gives a quiz, and this guy, who didn't go to undergraduate, he gets a 3. Astounding. So he goes over to the professor, and he says, I don't understand, I studied. How in the world did I get a 3? So the professor says, you're right. That's odd. How'd you do an undergraduate? So the guy says, undergraduate? I never went to undergraduate school in engineering. So the professor looks at him and says, are you crazy? This is graduate advanced material. What are you doing here? Gemara is graduate school. That's what it's for. The Gemara is a collection of sugyas. A sugya is a problem-solving format that presupposes that you have a massive database. And if you don't, most of your time you don't even know what's going on. You see? Because what are you doing in graduate school? It's elementary. It's obvious. But nobody seems to get it. You see? Because the goal of yeshivas, unfortunately, is not to know. They would like to know, but that's incidental. The goal of yeshivas is to be a bigger lamdan, lamdus. But what a mistake. You can be a phenomenal lamdan if you know Mishnais, because that's the database. You see. Anyway, it just requires logical thinking, and it would solve a humongous problem in Klal Yisrael that nobody seems to get, basically. There are some people who realize that, but their voices are not heard, because everybody's entranced with lumdus in the Gemara without knowing anything. What a mistake. What can I tell you? It's a tremendous mistake, because it could be done at the same time, even if you want to learn Gemara. Okay, but give some type of a Seder, 2 hours, whatever, and to master the Mishnais and to commit it to memory. You see, that's why I love the story with Rabbi Yisrael Zev Kustman. Imagine, 10-year-old kid knew the entire Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, all of it. And this guy, although obviously he had a tremendous head, he finished Shas at 16 because he already knew 40%, because he knew it by heart. And at 21 years old, he sat on the Bezdin of Rab Chaim Oizer Grudzensky. That's like, for Sfardim, that's like sitting on the Bezdin of Vad Yosef. It's the same thing. Rab Chaim Oizer Grudzensky was a Gadol Hador. So imagine a Sephardi kid sits on the Bezdin, 21 years old, with Rav Ovad Yosef. Wouldn't that be something, huh? You see? And it could be done if it was taught the right way, the right sequence. You see? There's a great deal more to speak about all this, but that itself is worthy. And that with pyramid, then people will be astonished at the mastery that they have. You see? And it would spread. Because in the end, what do you think a guy wants? He wants to know it. It's nice to have alumnus. It's nice to be able to answer a Rambam or whatever. But it's more important to remember everything, to know, like it says, it should be sharp in your mind. The Rebbe Shem says that. It's God talking. Right? And you should know diligently, means you should know it with tremendous mastery and command. Who does that today? It's not even a goal, really. Yeah, they're going to say, well, they learned the beginning of the Masechta and then they try to finish the Masechta. But the idea is don't learn it through the Masechta all day. Learn Mishnais, you see? Because it brings you the basic concepts without having to go through Shakla V'Taya. You see, that's the mistake. Focus on the information, on the knowledge, on the facts. Later on, you can focus on the debate itself, how they arrived at that information. You don't do that initially. That's graduate work. That's not the work really should be done, certainly in elementary school, but it certainly shouldn't be done all day and nothing else. You see, and ultimately it means, tragically, that most a tremendous amount of guys going to yeshiva will remember very, very little. That's what it means. And they'll be turned off because there's no hatzlacha, success. And the greatest way to continue success is to be successful, right? And then you get a sipuk, tremendous satisfaction from your learning. Mastery will give you that satisfaction like nothing else. You see? It doesn't take that long. Anyway.
So the Gullus could end by learning Mishnayos, but
right, that's what it says in the Medrash. What?
If we just take on that we're going to start, then we wouldn't have to wait those 2 years. We could speed it up without going through the whole 2 years of mastering it.
I'm not understanding your question.
Okay.
Is that a question you're asking?
Okay. It takes 2 years to learn the whole Mishnayos, right?
It could take 1 year. Depends how many Mishnahs you learn a day. Right?
Okay. So then if we actually could get like groups of people to commit and to actually do this, maybe we don't have to wait for them to actually have completed that 1 year.
That we don't know. We don't know. We don't really know. But it's very hard to change a system. They're all committed to Lumdus, Gemara, which is fine, but not unless you've mastered the Mishnais. You see, that's a tremendous mistake. What can I tell you? Okay. Thank you for the opportunity, to unravel what I feel and so on, And the problem is it's an incredible tragedy that a guy should go for 20 years to yeshiva and hardly remember anything. You see, that is an unbelievable tragedy. And it's continued on a daily basis. That's the tragedy. And in the end, we pay for that tragedy. Because many guys would have stayed longer, or they really would have come out knowing an incredible amount of Torah in depth if the system of learning would have been different.